All right, in this lesson we are going to learn about the number e. And yes, e is a number and not just a letter. So our learning targets for this section is I can graph the number e, and then I can use the number e to find the amount of money in an account with continuously compounding interest. So what is e? So here you see a graph of this function, y equals 1 plus 1 over x to the x. So one of the graph asymptotes, and remember from before we talked, an asymptote is a line that a graph approaches but never actually touches. One of the asymptotes of this function is y equals e, and e is an irrational number. And remember that irrational numbers are numbers that are decimals that do not end and do not repeat and go on and on forever. So e is an irrational number, and this is our closest approximation for e, 2.71828. So then we can talk about some exponential functions, right? And we've talked a lot about different exponential functions where our base was b. So we've got our, I don't know why it won't let me write. We've got our a times b to the x. And then, so here with our b being the base, and now here we're going to just start looking where e is our base and not b. Okay, so here we go. We've got some examples, and you can see in your calculator there is a number e on your calculator, so you don't have to try and remember the whole decimal. So here's our example. We're going to be evaluating e to the x. So first we're graphing it, y equals e to the x, and then evaluate e squared to 4 decimal places. So the first thing we did was we graphed e to the x, and we just put this in our calculator and we see this is what it looks like. And remember, we can do this without using our calculator as well. We can pick some values for x, plug those in, and then plot the points and connect them and graph it that way. Then the next thing we did once we graphed it, we found y when x equals 2. So we used our graph and we traced, and so that our value of e squared is approximately 7.38 and continuing on and on and on. Okay, so hopefully you've seen with money using simple and compound interest. Okay, mostly interest is compounded, and the more often it's compounded, the more quickly it increases, right? Because the difference is simple interest, you only make interest on the amount of money that you put into the account. With compound interest, the interest that you make is added into your account, and then you make interest on the interest that you've already made. So that's a good deal. Okay? So the more frequently interest is compounded, the more quickly the amount increases. So we're looking here at this continuously compounding. There's a different formula if it compounds a certain number of times a year or a day, but we're going to talk continuously, so which means it's always compounding. So here's what we're looking at. Now this is going to be something you're going to be using, so make sure you write this formula down. So A, which is the amount in the account, equals P, the principal. So the principal is kind of our starting amount, right? Times E, which is our number, and then RT, that's the exponent. So the rate of interest is our annual rate, and remember that you're going to be given these in percentages, but we don't like to deal with percentages, so first turn it into a decimal and then you'll be good. And T is the time in years. So let's look at an example. So suppose you invest $1,050 at an annual interest rate of 5.5% compounded continuously. How much money to the nearest dollar, now make sure you're paying attention of where you're rounding, will you have in the account after 5 years? So again, I go back to my formula for compounding interest. My principal was what I started with, was $1,050. E is just the base that I use. So here is this 0.055. That is where I have gone and taken my percentage and turned it into a decimal, and we're talking 5 years. So then all I have to do here is put these into my calculator and solve it. So first I multiply this 0.055 times 5, which gives me 0.275, and then I take e to that number, which gives me this long decimal, and I multiply that by 1,050, and I can simplify. And I'm told to round to the nearest dollar, so I look at the amount of change that I have left, and since it's below 0.5, I round it back down, so I will have 1382 in the account. So here I want you to go ahead and try this one. Suppose you invest $1,300 at an annual interest rate of 4.3% compounded continuously. Find the amount that you'll have after 3 years. So go ahead and do this and see what you come up with. So let's go ahead and look back at our learning targets and see if we can do those. So I can graph the number e. We used our calculator for this one, or we can just plug in points for x just like we've done before. And then I can use the number e to find the amount of money in an account with continuously compounding interest. So this is where a lot of your homework is going to be. So make sure you check your calendar for the specific skills that you need to do in Khan and the numbers that you need to do in the homework.